Thank you everyone for joining us and staying on for our next panel, A More Welcoming and Orderly Border. Today this panel will be moderated by Daniel Diaz, Organizing Director for La Unión del Pueblo Entero and a longtime advocate working with immigrant communities. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you to everybody that participated and helped organize this, New Ellis Island, to Rita, Border Network for Human Rights, and everybody else. Thank you for the opportunity to join today. Border communities have for years urged our state and federal leaders to invest differently in the border than what it has been traditionally, and create the conditions for border communities to welcome immigrants with dignity, to recognize our migrant brothers and sisters as human beings. One thing that clearly defines humanity for a lot of us is migration. To migrate is to be human. It's to look for a safer environment for you and your family. It's to look for better opportunities. It's to protect your family. Far too often, as the border has become the center of a national political debate, the border is portrayed as dangerous and criminal, building up a narrative that we at the border are only deserving of massive militarization that as a result disrupts local border residents and that treats thousands of migrants coming across like criminals as they enter the southern border. It's dehumanizing and unwelcoming, and we have a system that cages people, that jails people, that detains human beings simply migrating for a better life or escaping violence. But we have border communities who believe differently and leaders who believe differently. Border communities are welcoming no matter where we come from or how we got here. Most of us work hard for our families. Border communities are resilient, and we work hard to make our community a place where families can remain together and where we can all thrive. We believe that the southern border is the new Ellis Island of our time. We truly believe in the fundamental human pursuit of liberty because so many of us at the border are still in that pursuit ourselves and will defend that pursuit for others escaping violence or looking for economic opportunity. We believe that our nation is stronger when it embraces inclusivity, opportunity for all, and when it creates the freedom to thrive without having to live in fear. And as border communities, we are working to build a more welcoming and orderly border. Our communities have filled in the gaps of service to address the needs of migrants seeking refuge in our country. Our panel today will include experts who are working to establish a more welcoming border. And today we're gonna have an incredible panel that really resemble this, that really defines those words that I just mentioned. Today we'll be joined by the Most Reverend Mark Seitz, the 6th Bishop of the Diocese of El Paso, and a longtime advocate of migrant and immigrant communities. We'll also be joined, and I know we're about to have the Bishop on, but we'll also be joined by Sister Norma Pimentel, who is the Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, and named one of Times Magazine's most influential leaders in 2020, and shout out to her. We're both from the Rio Grande Valley. Shout out to Sister. We'll also going to be joined by Clara Long, Associate Director of the U.S. Program at Human Rights Watch. So it's a pleasure to be joined by all of y'all. But we will begin to hear from Bishop Seitz a few minutes on your introduction on this topic, and we're so happy to have you.
Thank you. So good to be with all of you this morning. I'm delighted to be able to join in this this great event. It's so important that we step back and we reflect upon these realities rather than simply react, which is what seems to be happening in so many circles today. The border is indeed an important place, and I think that speaking especially for my own border community here in El Paso, we have a lot that we can teach the rest of our country, the rest of the world in a certain way, because of the way that we live this reality of the border. But something that I think is really important to point out also in light of this topic is that this isn't really just a border issue, right? the border has become a focus of attention because that's where a lot of things are coming together, where people can see lived out the consequences of various policies that aren't simply at the border, but impact the border. We really need to rethink what a border means as we rethink the meaning of migration. As Daniel pointed out, migration is a human reality. It's not something that is odd or outside of the realm of human experience. We learned so much about that in recent years as we've been able to trace our DNA, right? We all see that we came from somewhere else. This is what human beings do. Something else that I like to reflect about, and we only have 5 minutes here, so I'm just going to introduce these thoughts, is the way that we think about our economy. And I mean that in a very broad sense, because I think some people approach economy as though it's a matter of managing scarcity, and we live in a certain kind of fear that what we have will somehow be taken away. It's a limited resource, it will run out, and others, not only immigrants, but anybody else, becomes a threat to the us, whoever we consider part of this particular group, or it might just be ourselves as an individual. An economy of scarcity needs to be reflected upon, and the other option is an economy of abundance, one in which we see that when we work together, when we do basic things we were taught when we were little children, when we share, when we share what we have, then it's not a matter that we run out, but rather that everyone is raised up, everyone is in a better circumstance. And I think we can talk about this in a secular way and certainly understand it. But when we add the element of faith and we realize that we're not just by ourselves, but that when we share, when we love, when we give, that God blesses that that work, and he who creates from nothing is able also to care for us in our needs. We also, when we talk about the border, we need to look south to the root causes of migration, and we need to look north and to recognize that receiving migrants isn't just a work of a few people lined up along a line that we've created, but rather it is the work of a nation, of a country, to receive those who come. So we're not playing some kind of game of Red Rover, and trying to prevent people from coming over, but rather we are, as a nation, need to be talking about the reception of people who need to cross in an orderly fashion. Lastly, we need to look not only south, not only north, but we need to look within, because really this whole issue of migration ends up not being a question of what's going on outside of us as much as what is going on within us, what is happening within our hearts, what is the status of our heart. We need to examine whether it is warm and welcoming and loving, or whether it is cold and closed and hardened. We need to look within. I think when you examine the reality of immigration, what you will discover if you look within each of us is that to without realizing it, our hearts as a community, as a society, as a nation, and as individuals have become hardened. And that doesn't speak well for our well-being. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Bishop. And we're gonna get back with questions. We're gonna go with the rest of the panel, but thank you for those comments. Very true, very powerful. We're gonna invite up to the panel now, Sister Norma Pimentel from Catholic Charities here in the Rio Grande Valley. Sister.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Bishop Seitz, for your words and your message. You know, what is happening here at the border is a reality that is historical and something that I wish nobody would miss the opportunity to be part of in a very positive, good way, because it truly is who we need to be today is what Bishop just shared with us, you know. And so, you know, as you mentioned, that the southern border is the new Ellis Island. Well, I certainly do agree with that. I see that today, the Statue of Liberty, you know, is really us who stand up for human rights and for welcoming and to make sure that these families, these children, these mothers that are coming and fleeing a reality that is so devastating for humanity, you know, because it's truly, I always say that the border is bleeding, you know, and if you haven't seen it, you need to come and you have to see it for yourself, because I think it is only when we allow ourselves to get close enough to see that we will be moved to understand the words that Bishop just shared with us, to then know that, you know, our hearts will cry in what we must all do together to be that symbol of the Statue of Liberty that welcomes, that defends human rights, that this is who we are. It is us. Today we are that Statue of Liberty for the world, because we stand for welcoming and for protecting and defending and upholding human life. And that's the symbol, the icon of the Statue of Liberty, and that's who we are at the border today. And I think, and I welcome everyone to be part of that, because it is our time, and it's urgently needed that we come together as one, that we share this responsibility, defending human life, protecting humanity, and finding solutions that work, because up to this point, we've only tried to just be a Band-Aid, try to respond to a reality that we're seeing at the border, everybody trying to do their part. But basically, as Bishop said, the problem is not the border. Honestly, it's way deeper than that. And unless we address the true root causes of why so many thousands, literally thousands, are coming to our border, there has to be an answer, a response beyond just enforcing the border. We must find a way to help understand and give solutions to this reality that's causing so many people. I mean, if you walk our respite center, you will see human life in the most fragile, most hurting, after they arrive from all they go through. Why is what I say. Why do they have to endure those horrible journeys where time after time, everybody has an opportunity to take advantage of them, extort them, destroy their dignity? And so finally those that manage to enter the United States and are given permission to remain, which is not everybody, it's just, I would say, the lucky ones, you know, because somehow the system, there's a hole in that they were able to get that permission to remain in the United States and follow their immigration proceedings and try to see if they can find themselves here in a safer space in their life. And so, but if you walk through our respite center and you see the mothers and the children and the babies and the dads, what you will see is humanity destroyed by a society that is failing them. We must do something about this. It is our responsibility to truly focus on the things that matter. And it's never wrong to do the right thing, to save, protect, feed, care for a human person. This is our responsibility. It is who we're called to make this world a better world for all of us, and try to find that ways that bring us together instead of separate us more and more. I think that the reality is here, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, is one that I'm amazed at how good we can work together. Actually, the city officials and the Border Patrol and ICE and us, the church and the different churches, everybody joining together to find how I can help. How can we respond to what is happening, to deal with what we're seeing in our communities? So it is not chaos. It's the narrative we hear is so not true of what the reality is at the border. The fact is that we're making sure that people that are entering the United States are cared for correctly and processed correctly so that they're safe and that we're safe as well. And so everybody does their part. And together we manage to do our best to deal with what we're seeing today at the border. But we must address the true causes of why this is happening so that we can find solutions that better human life everywhere. And hopefully we can come out with the best response to what we're seeing here at the border today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sister, and very powerful. And I had the chance to volunteer a couple times there with you all, and you know, you're 100% correct. And the statement that you made about, you know, we are the Statue of Liberty, like, it just tells me we don't need a statue to remind us that we are that new Ellis Island, and that it's in all of us as a welcoming border residents. So many that when this first urgently needed to happen, where we needed to help our brothers and sisters from Central America or other parts of the world, came together to help your vision, right, in welcoming migrants with dignity. And we had a question from on Facebook about what does this mean, New Ellis Island? Well, that's exactly what it is, right? A community that welcomes people with dignity. You know, we know New Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, New York, that for many decades historically welcomed migrants from all over Europe, all over the world. You know, that's where we're at now. It's no longer there. It's in South Texas. It's in West. It's along the southwest border. This is where it's at, and we have to take that responsibility and step up, just like Sister has, and just like she said. But before we get to the questions, deeper conversation, thank you so much, Sister. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our next panelist to give her opening remarks. Clara Long from the Human Rights Watch.
Hi, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here today, and it's so inspiring to hear from these faith perspectives and from border perspectives. You know, for decades, Human Rights Watch has been working on violations of the U.S.-Mexico border, and what has become clear to us, and to me in particular over that time, is that ending human rights abuses of the U.S.-Mexico border is intertwined inextricably with listening to border communities and empowering border communities. And as Bishop Seitz and Sister Norma Pimentel also talked about, it's about a change in perspective on how the border functions. And so I just want to, in my remarks, kind of take us back a little bit and talk about what it would mean to transform the approach, U.S.'s approach to the border, in terms of sort of dealing with the legacy of where we are now. And may mean that it is a long legacy of militarization, securitization, the creation of the Border Patrol nearly 100 years ago, formed from the Texas Rangers, who had a history of protecting Anglo-American settlements and enforcing white supremacy when Texas was still a part of Mexico. And then a history throughout, especially the last 20 to 30 years, of increasingly harsh border enforcement policies that not only have punished migrants without giving them a chance to vindicate their right to seek asylum, but that also have been very hard on border communities in terms of the level of policing, the level of surveillance, the lack of investment in true thriving communities. So let me just put out there as part of this conversation that the conversation that we're having here is not separate from the conversation about how to make public safety really about achieving racial equity and creating the conditions for communities to thrive. In fact, it's the same conversation. And what that means is an investment in border communities to thrive without having to rely upon securitized approaches. The Border Patrols, of course, and Customs and Border Protection are, of course, massive employers in the region. But that doesn't mean that there's not good, dignified work to be had doing the kind of humanitarian reception that the U.S. Could and should do. I think the transformation needs to move through several steps in our view. One is accountability and transparency for U.S. border operations. But I think there's also a larger restorative justice view that needs to happen here, in which we talk about it and implement a border truth commission where we study the impact of the policies that have developed over the last decade, and including the use of prevention through deterrence policies and migration, including the use of policies that purposely send migrants into hostile terrain and in places where, especially as climate change increases the number of days of extreme heat, they are increasingly subject to really life-threatening conditions. And turning the page on those policies will mean, I think, as Bishop Seitz has very clearly indicated, will mean taking a broader view, looking south, looking north, looking at migration as a dynamic, not simply something that you can somehow stop or stem or tell people not to come. And it will also mean changing the way that things operate at the border, so that humanitarianism is privileged, so that we take inspiration and model from the incredible humanitarians, including Sister Pimentel, who's already at the border doing this very work, in terms of receiving people with dignity. And from the perspective of U.S. government agencies, let's not mince words or be, let's not be naive about this. This is about change. This is about turning an ocean liner. These are agencies with huge budgets, with incredible, momentum in terms of a policy, in terms of the policy legacy that we're dealing with here. So that's why I think it's so important to be coming together and to be having this conversation. And I really appreciate being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Clara. And we'll get back with questions in a bit. We're also being joined, thank you so much, to the Honorable Tony Banegas, Consul Emeritus of Honduras and former Executive Director of the Colibrí Center for Human Rights in Tucson, Arizona. We're so glad you're able to join us. We're giving each panelist time to just make opening remarks, and we'll get back with questions. So Mr. Honorable Tony Banegas, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, and my apologies for late connection. I had a challenge with the internet, but I'm glad I'm here today, so thanks for inviting me. A few years ago, I read an article in one of the big papers, that said that the U.S.-Mexico border was like a Sisyphus dilemma. to refresh your Greek mythology, you know, Sisyphus was supposedly a king in the ancient Greece that was punished by the great Zeus, you know, for lying and cheating twice. And he was punished to take this roll up the hill, and you know, as soon as he got it to the top, of course, the rock went down. He was punished to do that for eternity. So that was his analogy when I was talking about the U.S.-Mexico border, meaning in plain English that everything that's happening on the U.S.-Mexico border is laborious and futile, he said, you know. And I said, I don't think I agree with that. I've been fortunate to represent Honduras for almost 10 years as an honorary consul for Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Nebraska. So I had a chance to travel from Tijuana all the way to El Paso and Brownsville and everything in between. I've been in every checkpoint. I've been in every detention center, mortuaries, you name it, hospitals. And I, you know, sent during that time 18 bodies and remains to Honduras who die alongside the border. So I've been on the border and I have a little bit of experience what's happening on the border. Unfortunately, you know, sometimes the border gets this mislabel, in my opinion, you know, by a lot of time by misinformation and a lot of time political reason. You know, we have to be honest about this region. And then it's used, and you see all these policies that, you know, in the name of safety, of public security, all this obsolete policies that are implemented and that cause more harm than good. Again, the border is a vibrant area. I've been everywhere there, and you know, people have lived there for thousands of years. You know, I tell people that before this Italian guy got lost in the Americas in 1492, there have been thousands of people on the border, you know, making this their home. And before the 1848 Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty. So there's a lot of history, a lot of rich history and culture in those communities, and they depend on each other. And so the border is such an important area. I was in Douglas just a couple of weeks ago on a volunteer project, and I was talking to some of the local Mexico residents, and they were sharing with me how tough it has been for them to enable to come to the U.S. for over a year because of the pandemic. And, you know, there's a lot of stories, you know, families and siblings who have not seen each other because the one that live in the U.S. cannot cross because they don't have paper. Likewise, the one from Mexico cannot cross, but that's just on the personal side. Then you get into the commercial side of the trade. Those communities are, you know, and again, it's from all the way from Tijuana to Brownsville. They'll intertwine and they depend so much on each other. So it's such a vibrant area that we need to keep that, despite what we see on the news about all this chaos, describe it as going on the border. So I'm optimistic about right now with the new administration. Again, I follow this all the news all the time, and I'm optimistic with what I've heard so far. One of the things that I like to point out briefly is that what like you said, I was the CEO of the Colibrí Center for Human Rights up until May. You know, we use DNA to identify remains of people who died every day on the border. But when I was there, I had a chance to work with the Southern Border Community Coalition that I'm sure many of you know. This is a group that comprises over 100 nonprofits from San Diego to Brownsville. And they came up in 2017 what they call the New Vision for the Border, which I think is a great blueprint that talks about, you know, how to address key areas, you know, safety on the border, how to welcome new visitors to the area with a new paradigm that still addresses all those concerns that people have, but it takes a different look at the border. I also had a chance to work with this group last year. We were able to get the Unidentified Remains Act that was signed into law on January 1. That law is going to bring a lot of resources to the folks who are working on the border, including beacons alongside the border. You know, one of the things that I know from working at Colibrí, that almost 98% of people bodies that they found on the border, they all had a cell phone. So it would be nice if they all been able to communicate. You know, they have access on 24 hours a day on a cell phone to call their families or the Border Patrol. So that's just one area that this new bill is going to bring. Also resources, more accountability between the GAO, the General Accounting Office, and the Border Patrol and nonprofits to work together. So I see, again, a lot of good things happening, and I'm optimistic about the future, but we need to debunk all this all this chaos that you see on the news about going on the border. And I'm looking forward to working with allies and folks like you and anyone on the call to look for a win-win. Again, I don't believe that assessment, the Sisyphus, challenge does an Sisyphean task, they call it. I believe that we can come up with a reasonable, humane policy that addresses the border, the U.S.-Mexico border. So on that, I leave it there, and I'll be open to any question you may have.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And we'll get back with some questions. One of the first questions I wanted to entertain to Bishop Seitz was, earlier today in the first panel, we had Congressman Escobar mentioned the southern border is sadly mistreated and shown as a war zone. When do you think the border will be open to Mexican nationals who live in the Mexican side and who cannot visit their families in the U.S. side, knowing the economic damages being done to border cities? Do you have a sense of that at all? And if you wanted to further discuss that.
Well, we're certainly all trying to stay connected in every way we can. And those of us who live on the border are very, very concerned that it be able to open again, because as others have alluded, the border is a place of interaction, of dynamism, of exchange. We depend on each other. We are connected in so many ways. So many people seem to have an image of a border that is almost like a demilitarized zone. Interesting how we use words, right? But we use that about a place that's highly militarized, right? In Korea. That's not the way our border is. We're a community, a binational community that has, for various reasons, had a line drawn across it. But our families live on both sides of the border. We work on both sides. Our economies are utterly dependent on that cross-border exchange. But as the question points out, unless we change the narrative that is being beaten into us on some media, then Sisyphus is going to be really, really busy for indefinite future, right? Because we've got to get beyond this false notion of what a border is. As Sister pointed out in her area of South Texas, as I could certainly point out from our area, there is not chaos on the border. We're ready to receive people. We are structured. People are open and generous, and we're able to receive people in a peaceful way. But it's very hard to get that message across today. We really have to work hard at it.
Right, thank you. Yes, it's certainly been a difficult time for border communities because we're so connected, right, to as a bicultural, binational community, and it's been a difficult year after this pandemic. This next question is for both Sister Norma and Clara. How can we have a compassionate and also a secure border? Is there such a thing? Does that work in your head? How can we have both a compassionate and a secure border? And I know that we could start with Sister Norma
Yes,
on that question.
definitely.
Yes,
of course, Danny. I have always said that both are important. We must always make sure that our law enforcement, our Border Patrol agents, I believe they're truly doing their job. Sometimes they are portrayed as if they're just letting everybody in, that no matter who it is, and that is totally untrue. It is important that they do keep our border safe, keep our country safe, and know who enters our country. I think that's definitely very important, and that should be the focus of Border Patrol, to focus on making sure our border's safe and our country's safe, and that they know who enters our country, to make sure that we here in the United States are safe. At the same time, not everybody entering the country is a criminal. The immigrants, the families, and they recognize that too. That's why they allow certain families, of course, that are are not a threat to the United States. They are entering the United States because they're victims of crime themselves. And so they need protection, they need care, they need safety. And I think that we can actually do both, and so I think that it's a matter of making sure that we don't just make it a one and all thing, like it's either or. No, we must protect our country, let the Border Patrol do their job, the law enforcement, and also let us take care of the families and the children and the mothers and the people that are running away from fear for their lives, and let us together make this right.
Thank you, sister. Thank you. And Clara, same question along the same. Yeah. So just to repeat it, how can we have a compassionate and also secure border? Do you agree with it? Do you think it fits? What do you think?
Yeah, if I'm breaking up, they'll wave at me because my connection seems to be suffering. What I want to say is that those things are not just compatible, they go together so incredibly well. A compassionate border is a border that focuses security threats. The Border Patrol itself has talked about its lack of desire to be doing, humanitarian work, its treatment of vulnerable migrants and asylum seekers as if they were criminals, is not only inhumane, it's a massive waste of resources. Treating people, with respect and dignity, treating them not as criminals, not criminalizing people who, as Sister Norma says, are coming, fleeing violence. All of this actually builds security into the U.S. approach to the border. And it also allows us to really address one of the major security threats that the border faces, which is accountability and transparency in border agencies. So that's a key part both of a secure border, but also of a compassionate one, having agencies that we can trust who are doing U.S. border management.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, Clara, on the accountability. I think that's been a big concern for a lot of advocate organizations where law enforcement agencies have been left with the task to do humanitarian work, but they're not so much. It doesn't seem like they're apt for it, or there's been some violation of human rights from law enforcement. We've dealt with cases. What do you think about that? You want to go in deeper into that part about accountability and transparency from law enforcement?
Sure. I mean, one way that this shows up is with respect to ports of entry, right? I mean, I think people who live and work along the border and perhaps who speak to migrants know that there is a surefire way for migrants to avoid detection when they enter the U.S. or not just migrants. That's me adopting a securitized language there. There's a surefire way for people who actually pose security threats to evade border detection, and that's to work with a corrupt government agent. And the Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Homeland Security more broadly are confronting a massive crisis of accountability. They've underfunded their Office of Inspector General. They've underfunded internal accountability. They have not investigated hundreds and hundreds of complaints, failed to follow up on complaints that have been substantiated. And what that means is that accountability has really concrete and clear security impacts. So it's not only an important issue to tackle for security reasons, but it also has massive impacts for fair and humane and dignified treatment, because of U.S. agents, of course, not everyone, and there are people who are committed to following the rules. But if U.S. agents feel that they have that there's no consequences for bad behavior, then it is the rule of institutions around the world that bad behavior will persist and propagate.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you so much for that, Clara. This this next question is for the Honorable Tony Banegas. How has militarized presence, so, you know, we've often seen like an increase of militarization from the federal government in the southern border, and we often think of it creating sort of like a chokehold and actually creating conditions where migrants seeking refuge are taking riskier, it's getting riskier and riskier and more dangerous, right? Because of that massive militarized presence. How has this militarized presence increased the number of migrants dying on the border? I know you mentioned that you've had the super tough job of having to identify folks that have passed, you know, and having to send them back to Honduras. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a direct correlation between the number of deaths and what has happened on the border in the last few years. Again, I said I've been on this community for over 30 years. When I was at Colibrí, you know, almost a year. So the numbers, one thing that is hard to get a good handle. And going back to the Border Patrol, you know, their numbers of how many identify, how many bodies are found, they're always underestimated, way over underestimated. We at Colibrí and other agencies kept the most accurate count, but I can give you an example that at the end of last year, we believe we found 224 remains. We broke a 10-year-old record in 2010. So the number has increased exponentially. And DOLA has to do with what happened at the border. I told you I was in Nogales and in Douglas, a couple of weeks ago. The presence, the military presence there has forced all these folks to go to very remote areas. The most remote areas you can find at the border here. And, you know, again, I tell people that you come in from Guatemala, Honduras, you know, people don't have money to, a lot of time they don't have money to come and bus. So they come and train, they come by bus, they haven't slept for days, they haven't eaten for days. So you're already, you know, in not a great shape and may have some health challenges. So this is the perfect combination for them to, and then don't know anything about the desert. You know, I read reports daily. I used to get reports that people die from hypothermia. You die from the cold, you die from the heat. People from Honduras, you know, my beloved country, you know, we get rain, a lot of rain and heat, but we have no idea that the temperature drops at night and the winter here in December, you know, to 28, 30 degrees and you can die of cold. So all this to say that what has happened in the border in the last few years with this prevention to deterrence, you know, policy that was implemented 3 years ago, has forced thousands of people, you know, a lot of time women and children to go to those very remote areas and therefore they die. And I mentioned, you know, the phone, they do have phones. Most of the time they have a phone, but they cannot communicate. So I can't wait for this new law to go into effect. You know, of course, we have to have Congress to allocate funds because they're supposed to place 125 beacons alongside the border that will allow, again, migrants to communicate on a 24-hour if they need help. And to the point, clearly a question, one of the provisions that I mentioned and that new bill, the Identify Remains Act, it forces the CBP and the GAO to share information about remains and accurate count. So we have an accurate count. You know, a lot of the nonprofits working on the ground, they have a good information. So it forces both the GAO and the CBP to share information. So make sure that we are working together. So, but to your questions, yes, there is a direct correlation between what all this equipment, raiders and zoners have done to the increase of death. You can see the graphs. Any point in time, you'll see the increase in death.
Yes, thank you. Norma? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add something to what he just said?
Of course.
I just want to just reinstate also the fact that so many people put themselves at harm's way, in danger. They lose their lives crossing the river. I've seen mothers, pregnant moms that have to wait until they're 9 months pregnant with labor pains because that's the only hope that they're not going to return back. They go through desert areas or turn themselves over to traffickers that really abuse them and possibly even kill them in many cases, all because we lack the immigration reform that we need to have in place, where there are safe passages for immigrants and refugees that are looking for safety, and they have no other course because we don't have anything to offer them to enter the United States safely, you know. And so I think this is urgent that we have immigration reform to establish this and make it safer for the immigrants to enter the United States.
Yes, totally agree. We need that, huge reform for our families to be able to, live more freely in the United States, right? And then also, when folks are crossing, they don't have to put themselves through such dangerous situations, right? Wanted to get back with Bishop Seitz on if you had any closing remarks. Want to give you another chance if you had anything else that you were urging to say.
Well, there's so much that could be said, right? This is such a big topic. But let me just follow up in terms of our attitude towards immigrants. The truth is that we need them so badly. We need them in a moral sense because their presence gives us an opportunity to serve the poor. We need them in an economic sense because they're ready to do jobs that people here aren't willing to do. We need them in terms of the way that their particular commitments and their values enrich us. Our country is not providing, it's not reproducing adequately, even to keep our numbers where they are. An economy, the way that our economy works, it has to grow. And the only way it can grow is by receiving them. So, we're hurting ourselves in so many ways by our negative attitude towards the stranger.
Well, thank you so much, Bishop. And yes, thank you all very much for sharing your expertise, your specific work at the border. To end it, I would just say that, the work that we're all doing, we need to help amplify it. We need to help scale it up. How do we welcome more human beings, brothers and sisters from across the world at the border with dignity, right? How do we grow the capacity that Sister Norma is doing, in McAllen to across the entire border, right? More legal assistance, more humanitarian aid, that type of welcoming. And that's how I'll end it today. That, how can we work together to be able to scale that up, to work better on that. And of course, we're all working from our own lane, right? And doing incredible work. But it was so honored to be here in this discussion with everybody doing incredible work. Thank you so much, Bishop Seitz, Sister Norma, Honorable Tony Banegas, and Clara Long from Human Rights Watch. It was a pleasure. It was an honor. Y'all take care. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.